Hi, I'm Becky Streepy from Glue and Glitter, and today we're making vegan beef stew. You can make this recipe on the stovetop or in the Instant Pot. I'm going to show you the Instant Pot recipe today, and if you need the stovetop directions, there's a link in the description to my website, and I have those available to you there. I know, y'all, calling this recipe vegan beef stew is probably raising some eyebrows, and I wanted to address that because I do get that question quite often. When I say something like vegan beef or vegan chicken or vegan egg salad, I'm saying that because, like it or not, meat eating culture is the mainstream, and you know exactly the flavors and textures to expect when I call a recipe something like vegan beef stew. This recipe is packed with carrots and potatoes and vegan beef in rich, flavorful broth. It's got all of those sort of flavors and textures that you would expect from a beef stew, and that's why I call it that. But enough arguing semantics. Let's get to this recipe. Using the saute button allows you to cook this whole dish in the same pot. You saute in the pot and then you add everything else, lock the lid and cook. So start by pressing your pot's saute button and add a tablespoon of olive oil. If you don't do oil, you can water fry instead. I think that the oil gives the broth a little bit more of the richness that makes it evocative of a more conventional beef stew, but you do you. If you're oil-free, then you can definitely water fry. Now add a 9-ounce package of Gardein Beefless tips or 9 ounces of whatever vegan beef substitute you like, as long as the vegan beef you're using is in chunks. You don't want ground beef because that's not what you use to make a beef stew. So like any sort of like a beef style seitan would be a good option here. Next, add a cup of diced sweet onion, and then give everything a stir and let it cook for a few minutes until the onions start to soften. Now it's time to add everything else to the pot. So toss in 2 cups of sliced carrots, and you just want those in like 1/2-inch thick rounds. And it's okay if the diameter is different sizes, as long as they're about the same thickness. They'll cook through just fine in the time allotted. Then add in 3 medium diced potatoes. You're going for about 3.5 cups of cooked potato here, and you want those in 1-inch pieces. Then add 1.5 cups of water. If you're doing this on the stovetop, you'll need to add a little bit more water. That's because the Instant Pot is totally sealed, so you won't be losing very much moisture during the cooking process, but on the stovetop, more water is going to boil off, and you don't want the pan to get too dry. Now it's herb and spices time. Add a teaspoon of garlic powder, a teaspoon of ground sage, and a teaspoon of ground thyme. If you can't find ground sage or ground thyme, you can just use 2 teaspoons of dried versions of each instead. Now add 2 bay leaves to the pot, and then add 2 vegan broth cubes. I recommend using a beef style broth cube because that's going to just amp up that beefy flavor of this recipe even more. I'm using Edward & Sons not beef bouillon, but you can also use Better Than Bouillon. They make a paste that's vegan beef broth, and for that you would use 2 teaspoons instead of the 2 cubes. And then if you're making this on the stovetop, you would just add either an additional broth cube or an additional teaspoon of the broth paste that you're using. That's because you're using more water, so it would be more diluted if you stuck with the same amount. Once you have all the ingredients in the pot, give it a stir, lock the lid, and then set it to sealing and cook it at 5 minutes at high pressure with a 10-minute natural release. Once that 10-minute natural release time is up, you're ready to eat. Give it a stir and serve it up in big old bowls. I like to dish this up with green onion sprinkled on top for even more umami flavor, but you can certainly just serve it up as is. It's totally delicious with nothing added into it at all. I hope that this video has answered all of your questions about how to make vegan beef stew in the Instant Pot. If you have any questions that I didn't address in the video, feel free to drop a comment. I'm always happy to help. And don't forget to rate and subscribe. Happy cooking!